So my name is Keith Glassberg. I'm the conference chair. I'll be emceeing throughout the day, so I'll be up here with instructions and transitions and stuff like that. So Energy and Transportation panel is moderated by Ward Lenz. He's from NCSEA. And then we have panelists from DTE Energy, Nissan, and EVgo. As a reminder, the Q&A portion will be the same system as last time. We'll have a URL up on the screen so you can submit questions, and then we'll bring them for the moderator. And please welcome Ward and the panelists onto the stage. Thank you.
Like you said, my name is Ward Lenz. I'm Managing Director at the North Carolina Sustainable Energy Association. We are actually in the process of celebrating our 40th anniversary. We do a lot of policy and advocacy and regulatory work, a lot of which has resulted in North Carolina being the only state in the Southeast with a renewable portfolio standard, as well as being number 2 in solar installations in the country. So we've had a lot of successes over the last 40 years, which has led to leadership for North Carolina in the energy sector. This session, listed as transportation and energy, we decided to focus on electric vehicles and the future of basically ground transportation, passenger vehicles as well. So we'll start with the current status of electric vehicles, whether it's the vehicles themselves, the charging technologies, or the grid interconnection, and then kind of dive into what we think is the future. I do want to, he briefly introduced our panel. We have Cornelius Willingham, who is Manager of Electric Vehicle Fleet Business Development for the Southeast and Mid-Atlantic for Nissan Motor Corporation. Marcy Bauer is the Director of Program Operations for EVgo, which is the largest public fast charging network. And Kelsey Peterson, who is Senior Associate in Corporate Development at DTE, which is the largest by sales electric utility in Michigan. And she's also a graduate here at Duke University in the cross-continent MBA program. For run of show, we'll have each of the panelists do an opening comment to introduce themselves more, their organization, and give the audience the #1 takeaway that they would like to provide you with. Then we'll do some planned out questions, take some audience questions, and then give the panel one more opportunity to make a closing sell if they can. So. I'd like to turn it over to Cornelius from Nissan, who is going to give a kind of a foundation on the vehicle technology.
My area is electric vehicles and what's going to happen in the future. Virtually everybody in this room seems to be in that under 30 or 35 range, and within your lifetime, you will all own an electric vehicle. All of the numbers say that. Even OPEC has come out and upped their forecast by 500% of electric vehicle adoption. They believe that there'll be 266 million by 2030. Bloomberg Financial says they're being conservative and it'll be double that number. But University of Berkeley all say that electric vehicles will be more than half the passenger vehicles in America within the next decade. Just like no one here probably has a flip phone, no one in 20 years will have a gas-powered passenger vehicle. Now, obviously electric vehicle adoption has a lot to do with infrastructure. You have to have the charging first, but like indoor plumbing, electricity is pretty popular in homes across America. And I think that you'll find that 80% of people who buy electric vehicles charge at home right now. And the public charging has really become kind of a safety net. Now, as you look at why this is happening, there are really 3 basic reasons why electric vehicles are going to come. Cost being one. 80 to 90% less to operate an electric vehicle than a gas-powered vehicle. According to the Department of Energy, if you're spending $300 a month on fuel and maintenance on your car, it's going to equate to about $20 a month. in electricity. That's a significant savings. In addition, reliability. They did a study in the UK, and electric vehicles are as much as 25 times the reliability rate of gas-powered vehicles, with about 2,000 fewer components, which means that those components never have to be repaired or replaced. And then the last is the environmental piece of the puzzle. Obviously, we've reached 400 parts per million CO2 in the atmosphere. There's an Allstate commercial out right now that says that 500-year weather events, there have been 26 in the last decade. Add Hurricane Michael, and now it's 27. You could, by replacing a single gas-powered vehicle with an electric vehicle, you can save 6 to 9 tons of CO2 from going into the atmosphere, which is the equal of planting 2,500 trees annually. Now, I don't know how many trees you've planted this week, but I'm thinking that you're probably going to fall a little short of that number. But if you adopt an electric vehicle, or better yet, you support other people adopting an electric vehicle, you can help with the process. I've always said I'm not the greatest environmentalist in the world, but if I can get my neighbor to be, we're halfway home.
Great, and thank you. And we'll transition to Marcy, but before Marcy's in the business of putting charging infrastructure in place, and so I wanted to check with the audiences, who is currently driving electric or plug-in hybrid electric? So we have a number of folks. Who thinks in the next 5 to 10 years they'll be driving electric or plug-in hybrid? So I think that's a good market share potential for you, Marcy. Yeah. And then Cornelius will be happy to sell you a car as well.
Excellent. So as Marcy Bauer with EVgo, we are in the business of deploying electric vehicle charging stations primarily focused on fast chargers. And as Cornelius mentioned, roughly 80% of electric vehicle charging, different people, different times, 80% of that share is done at home. But the other 20% is really crucial to making that purchase or lease decision. It's much more disproportionately important, in fact. So that's where we come in. So as he mentioned, a safety net, but also increasingly a well-utilized safety net. So it's not just this sort of psychological impact. It's actually public fast charging in particular, compared to public slower charging, is actually very well used and increasingly so. So EVgo's charging station network runs 1,100 chargers last time I counted, and rapidly expanding, including through programs and projects out here in the eastern states, where most of my programs and projects are focused. And across our entire network in 2017, we delivered over 1 million charging sessions in 2017 throughout the whole year. This year, we hit 1 million in the beginning of August. So that kind of gives you some idea of what's happening in that market, not just because of electric vehicle adoption growth, but because the chargers are being placed where they're needed and well used, at locations where people are going anyway, so they can charge while they pick up some groceries. And they're being placed at locations where people who don't have home charging, which is a really crucial next step market for broader EV adoption, they can have that be their once or twice a week, pick up groceries, charge your car arrangement, where they really don't need that home charging to make the decision to purchase or lease, and that's really crucial. So that's where we come in, and we're just really looking forward to expanding myself personally out here in the East in particular.
Great, thank you, Marcy. And then we'll transition to the electric utility perspective, and how do electric vehicles that, if Marcy's successful, there's a whole bunch of high voltage charging stations, and so how does it impact electric utilities?
Yeah, so you know, that we talked about energy efficiency earlier, and how, you know, sales of electricity are projected to be relatively stagnant into the future. So electric vehicles are a huge load growth opportunity for us. But I think more importantly, if utilities play a role in the integration of the charging into the grid, and if the charging is managed correctly to be shifted to off-peak hours, then I think what I'd like the audience to take away today is that EV load growth is an opportunity for rate affordability for all electric utility customers and not just those who own an electric vehicle. So DTE has been involved, all of our fast charging in our territory is EVgo or Tesla. And we've been thinking through the last couple of years what we can do to increase EV adoption. So we just recently filed an EV program, Charging Forward, as part of our last general rate case. And so looking forward to the outcome of that next spring.
How long do utility commission decisions take in Michigan?
About 10 months in Michigan, yeah.
Okay. I'm looking at you too. Thank you for the opening comments, and we do have one more question for, we'll go down the row again, and then kind of open it up for more of the discussion. But if you could, go into a little bit more detail about what role you and your company play in the overall EV marketplace, why, and what do you see as the value proposition for your company, especially towards MBA students?
Well, Nissan makes the Nissan Leaf. That is the best-selling electric vehicle in automotive history. We've sold more of those vehicles worldwide than any other product out there. It was designed to, matter of fact, the word Leaf is actually an acronym. Leading, environmentally friendly, affordable family car. So if you ever see the word Leaf, you'll see it capitalized as opposed to the, with a capital letter at the beginning and smaller letters at the end, and that's because of that. And it was designed to be a utilitarian, everyday vehicle for people to be able to drive. Now, there are lots of electric vehicles out there, many of them much sexier than a Nissan Leaf is. We consider Leaf sexy if you consider the word practical.
I do.
Our role is basically to bring electric vehicles to the masses. If you are a commuter, if you are a fleet, if you are somebody who drives anywhere between 20 and 50 miles a day, and 84% of the population drives less than 50 miles a day, then electric vehicles for you. The closer you are to that 50-mile range, the more dollars you put in your pocket. And that's domestic. When you talk about utilities, those are domestic dollars. That's not gasoline that you're importing from someplace else. There are no national security implications in it. This is electricity that would have normally gone to waste, and as people charge up overnight when their loads are relatively light. Our role is to be able to bring that vehicle out and to explain to the general population, not just those who can spend $100,000, but those who can spend what an average car costs, that electric vehicles will work for them.
And Nissan invested quite a bit in the manufacturing here in the U.S.
Right, we have the largest assembly plant in the United States. And the Nissan Leaf is made in Smyrna, Tennessee. It's an enormous plant. The plant manager always talked about it before it was built. When they were just a slab, he could hit a 7-iron, and the ball would bounce on the concrete, and it would stop rolling before it got to the other end of the assembly plant.
Thank you. Marcy, do you?
So we charge the Nissan Leaf and the Chevys and the Hyundais and the Teslas, actually. Although Elon would have you think otherwise, we charge quite a few Teslas. So obviously, our approach is to be your community charging partner. We install our chargers at places where you are going anyway, whether you're passing through or whether you live there. These are at grocery stores, at retail centers, at mixed-use facilities that have high traffic and good crossover. We have fast chargers in markets where 90% of the electric vehicles are sold today, and we're rapidly expanding that upwards towards 100. So that's our focus, and that's our mission. But in terms of what messaging we'd like I think the general public to take away is public and increasingly also fleet-oriented fast charging is just really crucial for that next step of EV adoption, and we aim to meet that need. The need now and the need that we foresee in the next 5 to 25 years. It's rapidly expanding. We're doing everything we can to make that happen so that no one ever again says, well, there aren't any chargers, so I can't get an electric car. But it's still really difficult. It's installing electric vehicle charging stations, particularly fast chargers, is not an easy proposition. So that's kind of what we're focused on.
Is that because of interconnection, or is
it's a lot of things. It's a lot of
code.
Yeah, it's partly that. It's just the value proposition for property owners isn't universally accepted, even though there are lots and lots of supporting documentation and evidence to support that. But you know, not all of those companies are really thinking outside that far outside their box. So we're helping them with that, but it's not quite universally there yet. Permitting and codes, there are obstacles in that realm. There's obstacles on the interconnection side, and it's just a really lengthy, challenging prospect. So when I often see posts from EV drivers, even ones that you can tell that were like early adopters and really got themselves well educated on the technology and the industry, I'll still see like, why did they put it here? And why don't they just put one here? Like, just put one here.
Yeah.
It should be like, you know. And so that's the kind of thing, like, we are trying our hardest to put one there.
Perfect, thank you. Kelsey?
Yeah, I think for DTE, we see there's a few barriers to EV adoption still. We consider, you know, the upfront purchase price is still a little bit more expensive. With improvements in battery technology, that'll be taken care of in a few years. The availability and range of EVs is still a little limited. Again, a lot of new models are coming to market, but where we see utilities playing a role is the lack of awareness of the economic and environmental benefits of EVs. So as the provider of the fuel for electric vehicles, educating our residential customers on the benefits like that, and then also the charging infrastructure, as you mentioned. So we also, the site hosts are our customers, not just the drivers. So educating site hosts on why it's beneficial to provide charging for your employees or for your customers is one big thing, but then also something our program would do if approved is provide the make-ready infrastructure to help with the interconnection costs so that it's not, the capital cost isn't so intensive for them, and it makes the business case much stronger for owning charging stations. And then lastly, one thing in particular with DTE that's unique is that we offer a commercial rate without demand charges. And demand charges can be a big impediment to fast charging. In particular, it can be like 80% of your bill because of the nature of the charging and the power draw. So looking at what we can do to incentivize both the site host and the driver to look at EVs as their next vehicle and provide the charging.
Just stemming off of that, so I concur wholeheartedly about the electricity cost piece. I think the last estimate, I have a great pie chart or something like that would visualize this perfectly for you guys. But the last update that I saw estimated roughly 40% of our total operating costs goes towards electricity, and a huge chunk across our entire network. And so, you know, we have chargers all over the country. Some of those areas have demand charges, others don't. Some have low demand charges, others have really high. So across our entire network, roughly 40% is electricity. A huge chunk of that, though, is demand charges, even though we have chargers in places that don't even have those charges at all. So yeah, that's a huge obstacle.
Oh, great, thank you. So the next question I had is, what are, and this can be any order, jump in how you want, what are some of the myths you hear that you would like to address up front? About electric vehicles, charging, whatever.
I already said mine. There are no chargers anywhere.
There are a lot of myths. I mean, there are more myths than there are facts out there. You know, I've had people say, well, you can't wash an electric vehicle because of, you know,
Can't charge in the rain.
Can't charge in the rain. You know, the one thing you need to probably understand about an electric vehicle is range. What's real and what people imagine. Everybody dreams of, you know, doing Route 66 and going to California. You haven't driven 10 or 12 hours if you really want to drive 10 or 12 hours, because it's really miserable. That's what happens to people. People think that they need all of this range because you've been taught that. You've been taught, you all can hear your parents' voice in your head saying, don't let it get below a quarter of a tank. You've been taught to fill up rather than charge up to fill every day, because if you paid $16 to $20 a day to drive, it would really make you angry. So filling up once a week at least, rip the Band-Aid off, so to speak. There are a lot of myths out there, but one of the biggest ones is range. 70% of the population drives less than 30 miles a day. The average drive is 5.95 miles. 84% of the people drive less than 50 miles a day, and only 1% of your drives exceed 70 miles. So how much range do you really need? We make a car that does 151 miles of range. We've done studies, and 153 is the magic number. It'll do 99.44, 100% of all of your drives, all right? Now, the reason we don't have to invent anything to make them go farther. It's a matter of battery costs. Battery costs have declined 80% in the last 5 years, and they're going to continue to decline. They've gone from $1,400 a kilowatt hour down to somewhere between $300 and $500 in manufacturing right now. And LG Chem says they get the number down to $100. At that point, it's going to cost less to put a battery in a car than it will to put a transmission in a car. So if we have a $30,000 car that does 151 miles an hour, we can make it go 300 miles, but it'll cost you 60 grand. And most people want to pay around that $30,000 number. And so your biggest myth is that somehow you've got to invent something to extend range.
I think there's a couple myths on the utility side that I'd like to address. The first is that rate basing an electric vehicle program is subsidizing the wealthy at the expense of the poor. But our analysis actually shows that every EV sold can offer anywhere from $2,000 to $3,000 in net present value rate affordability benefits to everyone. And the reason this is like Cornelius mentioned, because 80% of charging is done at home, you can incentivize the drivers to charge off-peak, and this is essentially more sales over the same fixed costs. So it's putting downward pressure on rates, which helps everyone. The second thing is EVs aren't any better if you're in a coal-heavy state, because coal is basically, making it worse for the carbon emissions anyway. But even in Michigan, which is currently a coal-heavy state, the Alternative Fuels Data Center calculates that the wells-to-wheel emissions for electric vehicles are still 45 to 60% less than a traditional internal combustion engine vehicle. So as our and many other states' generation portfolio continues to get cleaner, this number will only improve.
I think the last time I ran the model in North Carolina, I would have to be driving a gas car that gets roughly 83 miles to the gallon in order for it to be equivalent or something thereabouts, which doesn't exist, obviously. But
and in addition, for maybe Marcy or Cornelius, is a lot of people, when you're used to filling up gasoline cars, you fill them up to the top until the pump stops. But with battery technologies, you can get to 80% pretty quick. Is that right?
You can.
And how do you change a mindset for folks that, if I only need to go 50 miles, how long do I need to charge?
This is electric vehicle has more relation to this than it does to an automobile, to a gas-powered automobile. You don't wait until you run out and then start charging. You top off. And you top off when the opportunity presents itself. And that's what electric vehicle, when people buy an electric vehicle, usually the first week or two, they're going to charge every day. Then they're going to figure out that they don't drive as far as they think they do. And they're going to start charging up 2 to 3 times a week.
at the grocery store.
Yeah, at the grocery store, or at work. That's what they tend to do. When I ask people how far they drive, they go, oh, 40 minutes. Well, that's not a distance. And cars, and an electric car doesn't care about time, it cares about distance.
Yeah.
that's probably the most important thing.
So I don't really know the answer directly to your question, but if we had some market psychologists look at some of the behaviors we're seeing out of our rideshare partners, I think they would have the answer for you, because those are not electric vehicle people. Like, they have not done their research. They have gotten 15 minutes of orientation on what the car does differently and how to charge it and roughly where to charge it. That's it, 15 minutes of education, and within 1 week they're driving astronomically high mile counts. And this is in the rideshare sector, obviously, so there's that extra motivation because they want to get all those trips in. But this range anxiety thing just evaporates faster than I ever would have imagined. And that's not a one-for-one comparison to the general public, but it's got some, there's information in there that's relevant. This notion of range anxiety. And as Cornelius said, even the general public, when they buy or lease that electric vehicle, within a week, their charging habits change dramatically once they've kind of settled into things a little bit.
Great. And you mentioned ride sharing. So that kind of leads into my next question, which is new technologies and new market influences. So we're looking at electric vehicle as a new technology, but there's also autonomous or semi-autonomous systems, or Nissan has a different term for it. That's cooler, I hope, as well as ride sharing and the trend towards younger generations than Cornelius and I having less likelihood of actually owning vehicles. So I didn't know if you wanted to touch on that.
Well, our Nissan Leaf that's just come out has become our platform for intelligent mobility. Whether you have a tennis racket that has a big head on it or a golf club that's a 460cc, it makes you better. You're a better player. We're talking about a car that's going to make you a better, safer driver. We understand that people are distracted. They're distracted by their phones. They have a lot of accidents. How about having your car help you? How about having the car have automatic emergency braking and simply stop before it hits stuff? I mean, it seems like a simple idea, but if you got the technology, why wouldn't you do that? Why wouldn't you have the car alert you that your speed is you're going a little too fast to be able to stop when another object is stopped in front of you with a beep or something like that? Or to have the car center you in your lane while you're driving so that you take some stress off. We have a thing called ProPilot, when you'll see the commercials about it, which fundamentally is, we call it driver assist technology, because we really do want you to stay in control. We don't want anybody taking naps or anything like that. No way to work. But it basically allows you to stress-free manage the drive to work, almost like an autopilot.
So that's what's available now, but looking a little bit farther forward at autonomous vehicles, I really haven't seen any treatment of AVs that didn't assume EVs. That those are just completely intertwined and inseparable. So you really can't consider the AV future market as anything other than electrified, and there are a lot of really important reasons for that. That's a whole other panel, and then some. But so our work in rideshare, which feeds beautifully into both electric vehicles now and then AV tech when that's deployable more broadly, it's like I said, you instantly see these numbers that I never would have guessed in terms of utilization, in terms of becoming really comfortable with the technology very, very quickly. And the extra bonus that I like is, it's going to be a while before vehicle ownership goes away completely. I mean, there's going to be a runway for that. Same thing with AVs. But that fleet application in the rideshare sector is awesome, because you get the driver, who was not an electric vehicle person, driving an EV now, and all of their passengers are riding in an EV over and over and over again. So that's sort of conditioning a whole broader range audience to be comfortable and familiar with it, to understand that it's not a golf cart, that it can drive on regular roads just like all the other cars can, that it has great power and pickup, that it's super quiet so they can hear their conference call in the back seat. You know, all these compounding benefits, and they're being exposed to that increasingly. And then as we use that runway up toward true AV and less individual private ownership of vehicles, you know, that seamless merging of AV and EV is already there. And yeah, amongst the next generation, you know, my neighbor's kids have no interest in getting their driver's license.
Yeah.
Their license at all. I mean, that's completely different from what we're used to, but and they're not alone at all.
Maybe a couple figures to throw out there too that I've come across. Because there's different levels of autonomy, and true fully autonomous is really level 5. And I think that most industry experts don't predict that level 5 autonomous vehicles will be available until after the 2030s for wide consumer purchase. But we expect that the upfront purchase price of EVs will be equal or less than traditional gasoline vehicles by the mid-2020s. So economic factors will probably drive the adoption of EVs before the autonomous, even though, agree, they're totally self-reinforcing trends that will seamlessly go together. And then on the ride-sharing side, because a vehicle is parked like more than 95% of the time, it only makes sense you know, as ride-sharing picks up as new options for consumers and new business models emerge, that these are electric because of the operational savings. So the more that the more vehicle miles traveled, the more it makes sense to be electric. So another stat is that I think Bloomberg New Energy Finance predicts that by 2030, 75% of ride-sharing miles will be fully electric.
Yeah, we're seeing that trend.
Great. Going to some of the questions from the audience, more for Kelsey at DTE is what do you see as the load and demand shifting, and how do you coordinate that with you know, people coming home and plugging in their car at peak phase, and how do you coordinate that?
Yeah, so I think it's a great load growth opportunity. I think looking at projections just for our territory in DTE, it's like adding 60,000 households by 2030 or something like that. So the load opportunity is great, but the reality is that's still a very small portion of our load. And the unique thing about EVs is that the load is really flexible. Most EV drivers, because they don't drive as much as they think they do, and they don't actually have that much to charge, they only care about the charge by feature. So charge my vehicle by the time I leave for work. So that allows the utility some flexibility and some room in managing the charging to make sure that it's done off-peak and in a way that doesn't require significant investment into the grid.
And is DTE as part of the charge forward? Are you offering different rates for different times for residential?
Yeah, so we do it today. We offer a whole home time of use rate, which is EV friendly. So you know, if you buy an EV, we've done some analytics that show switching the rest of your residential load to whole home will also be beneficial to you. But we also offer an EV only time of use rate today. And with the program, what we're offering is a $500 rebate to someone who installs a level 2 charger at home and is willing to go on one of our time of use rates. So definitely looking at incentivizing that. We're also looking at, we're doing a pilot with Ford, GM, and Chrysler with an EPRI software aggregating portal that can control the charging of vehicles through the communications to the user through a text. So trying to learn about user behavior of if we say, hey, don't charge between 3 and 5 p.m. today, will they opt in, will they opt out, how do they feel about that? Just trying to get an understanding of what the value of that demand response program is to the grid. Because again, EV load is flexible, so we want to try to manage it and shift it to off-peak hours.
And is there an effort to be able to use the vehicle to help manage the load as well on the supply side?
Like the vehicle to grid stuff? Cornelius might be able to answer this too, but from our discussions with automakers, that's a little further out. I think it will probably happen further in the future, but the batteries that have been developed today and all of the improvements, you know, the 80% cost reduction in lithium-ion battery packs, that's based on the charging cycles of driving, not based on depleting and recharging to power the grid. And that's obviously could be a big warranty issue for the automakers. So from our conversations, it's like, let's not talk about that yet. It's baby steps. So let's just get EVs out there and into the market. Let's learn more about the charging patterns. And then as the technology continues to evolve, then let's talk about how that can be a bigger grid asset.
And that's something that in the next year you'll start hearing a lot about that because for disaster recovery, a lot of municipalities, especially in Florida and Georgia along the coastline, are looking at being able to offload that power. Leaf has been able to offload through their Chatham port since 2013.
Oh, really?
And in Europe and Japan, that's fairly popular. It hasn't come really to the US yet because of the hertz associated with their difference in the way their electricity works. But it is a big deal to be able to have a generator on wheels. Let's say you have 30 vehicles. A single vehicle, a single Nissan Leaf, has about 40 kilowatts of power. A 2-bedroom apartment uses 9.6 kilowatts of power a day. So that means that a Leaf could run a 2-bedroom apartment, 1,100 square feet, for 4 days. In an emergency, that could be a pretty big deal for you. To be able to drive that car to a safe haven, charge up, bring it back, and plug in.
Actually, in my EV nerd social media, a number of folks were reporting that they hooked up their car to their home system after the various hurricanes we've had. And so theirs was the one house that actually had power that didn't have a gas engine, you know, hopefully not inside the garage, but outside. I did have we've got a couple other questions, but you talked about some of the environmental benefits, the greenhouse gas emission reduction from electric compared to gasoline. What are the other environmental benefits or risks that folks should be aware of as we're moving in this direction?
Well, obviously CO2 is a big one. I mean, any greenhouse gas, there are a lot of coincidences out there. What is it, 16 of the last 17 years have been the hottest on record, and each one has been greater than the other. I think they did some study that the Earth is the hottest it's been in 115,000 years, and that sea level and climate and temperature mirror exactly, for the last 450,000 years, CO2 levels in the atmosphere. So clearly there's an environmental issue. It's either the greatest coincidence in history or it is, you know, something that's real. If you can, in Atlanta, for example, Atlanta's just put 56 electric vehicles into their fleet. What they're trying to do is tread water. The city's growing. There's nothing they can do about it. More people will be there next year than there are this year. But if they can have EV adoption equal their growth rate, they can at least hold the line. And they're already part of the 15 counties that have air quality that doesn't meet standards. So they're just simply trying to stop the bleeding. And I think that's an important thing. It'd be great to reduce it, but the first thing you gotta do is stop digging.
Yeah. I don't know if you had anything to add to the environmental topic.
No, I think I already touched on it, that you know, even in coal-heavy states, and obviously there's a big push nationwide to clean up our generation portfolio. I know our CEO, Jerry Anderson, is the keynote later, and I'm sure he'll be talking a lot about that. So the statistics on the difference between the two types of vehicles will only continue to improve.
Right. So yeah, as you the longer you own your vehicle, the cleaner.
Right, it's the opposite curve from a gas car.
Right.
Yeah. The longer you drive the gas car, the dirtier it gets, from well to wheel, all the way through.
Another question from the audience is, do you see any supply side constraints on battery production for the source materials like lithium?
Everybody seems to be scrambling for lithium right now, but it seems to be relatively plentiful. I think there was some discovery off Japan of enough that there really should never be an issue. And so I don't see a situation where suddenly we're not going to have enough batteries. Batteries can be recycled, and even at the end of life, if you took a 40 kilowatt battery and it was at its end of life and it was only 22 kilowatts, that's still a significant amount of storage.
EVgo did a commercial deployment of batteries that were at end of their vehicle life and deployed them paired with electric vehicle charging as on-site storage to help do some peak shaving and help with that demand charge issue we talked about earlier. And so that helped us build a financial model for broader commercial deployment. And as far as I'm aware, we've seen no issues at all with that setup. It's been very positive.
Okay.
And it's important to note too that as battery technology breakthroughs and advancements occur, that also often results in changes in chemistry and changes in materials. So, what might be a red flag today in terms of component or source material, I've heard cobalt, I think, more recently, but the next generation of battery technology may phase that issue out. And it's going to constantly be, looking to the next one and then diffusing that situation with new advanced technologies and chemistries.
It's an arms race on the battery development tech.
I hope so. It's the most positive arms race I can think of.
I was at a conference earlier this year too, where tier 2 and 3 suppliers to the battery manufacturers were showing us their production charts and what they were forecasting to be, and they assured us that, even though it's been obviously the couple busiest years that they've ever experienced, they do forecast that they'll be able to keep up with production.
One last question from the audience is, what would be a policy improvement that you would like to see happen, either on the state or federal level with the commission, or maybe regulatory?
Well, I think we've supported in other areas. It's important to get people to consider an electric vehicle. And, getting something that's not moving to move requires generally some level of input of energy. If you have a person out there trying to buy a car and they don't know if they should buy electric or they should buy gas, having some type of incentive that at least gets them to do the math on an electric vehicle makes sense. Like I said earlier, those people who commute in or those fleets, if they simply sat down and took a pencil and paper or calculator and did the math, an electric vehicle absolutely makes more sense for them. But what's going to be the impetus for them doing that? And so that's where state and local incentives, utility incentives, things like that, even manufacturer incentives can move an object that isn't moving. Okay.
From our perspective, we kind of discussed it around the edges earlier, but any type of policy or program that'll encourage rate reform, some sort of EV charging friendly, all the utility rates across the country that haven't already treated this issue have rate structures that vastly predate the deployment of electric vehicle chargers, fast chargers in particular. So anything that helps generate rate structures that are more in line with the actual use case for public fast charging will be helpful. Anything that helps reduce that demand charge pain that we're all feeling in terms of operating expenses. Any kind of codes or ordinances or guidelines that help streamline the permitting and interconnection process, and anything that can help help us make the business case to the site hosts. I'm thinking mainly of a little bit of tax relief in some areas where that's feasible, but there are a lot of other creative ways to treat it as well. But those are the main areas, I think.
Okay.
Mm-hmm. I think first it'd be great for our program to be approved. So having regulatory approval and letting utilities play a role in this space would be great. And I think also, it's important for the utilities to know where the EVs are. And if you don't sign up for an EV time of use rate, we really don't have any idea, because you could install a level 2 charger at home if you already have the circuit for it. So, working with the Secretary of State to get the registration data would be really helpful for our planning and integration purposes. And then, I think the regulatory support in the states there's building momentum there, but continuing to see that would be really helpful.
Okay, great. She gave me the stop sign, but I wanted to give, if you had like 10 seconds or 20 seconds to give, if you have one last comment you want the audience to leave with.
I think that, I'm just excited to see that most people are considering an EV in the next 5 years and that there's going to be a lot of cool and exciting models coming to market. So consider it, talk about it, learn about it. I think that it's here to stay this time.
So I see EVs as representing energy security, which extends into national security and environmental security. And by my count, that's all three legs of a very stable stool to make the argument for electric vehicle adoption. And on the flip side, in terms of what we're seeing executed in the field, we're seeing EV chargers rapidly deploying. We're seeing policies and programs that help support that and electric vehicle adoption. And we're seeing this really exciting trend in electrified rideshare that then, runways into autonomous vehicle technologies. That's the future. But all those three things combined, I think, make me really positive about this sector.
The one thing you all can do is go drive an EV. If you have not driven one, go drive one. When we do ride and drives, the thing we hear the most is, hey, that drives just like a real car. Go drive one. I always say, go drive one, you'll be shocked.
Great. and I would say, I would say, I think it was part of the ad campaign in 2010, 2011 for the Leaf, where people were, one of the comments was, I have no idea what the price of gasoline is. Mm-hmm. And I thought that was a great line, and then I got an electric vehicle, and I have no idea what the price of gasoline is anymore. And I think that's a really key concept. I think I'm past time, so please, a big round of applause for the panel.